It's hard to believe, but Elden Ring has launched and there are countless new builds to be made. When you get your hands on the game, you want to figure out what kind of playthrough you're going to have. You could be a mighty hero, or a butt-naked guy. The choice is yours. I went ahead and made 10 different characters for the 10 different starting classes, and I played just up until the first encampment, and I completed the nearest starting dungeon with each of them. And I'll talk through their playstyle differences. Now, in my current day one opinion, right off the bat, I'm going to say I believe the best classes for most cases will probably be the Vagabond, Hero, or maybe the Samurai. Overall long-term optimization, I would say the Vagabond. However, for a first playthrough, that's actually not what I would recommend. But before I go into detail, I will give you this disclaimer. If you're new to these action RPGs made by From Software, starting classes are not very restrictive. Think of them as a basic starting framework for you to improve and change as you play through the game. Starting with the Vagabond, this build has the highest starting vigor, or health, of all the classes. It also has the lowest arcane at 7. It's absolutely the melee tank starting class. It's the only one that starts with a heavy load. That is to say, it has a slowed movement speed due to the heavy weapons and armor. See the slow roll. You could remove the sword and gauntlets to fast roll if you wanted to. Equipment load doesn't affect horseback combat, and you have infinite stamina in this game when outside of combat, so equipment load is arguably less of an issue in this game than previous ones, but it's still worth noting when in combat on foot. This class wears the full Vagabond armor set with heater shield, longsword, and halberd. The shield is a very good starting one, with 100% physical damage negation. With decent strength and high defense, you will be able to last longer in early combat, and you have some nice weapon options. One powerful short-range sword, and a longer halberd which can clear out groups and poke down enemies on horseback. While making this video, I was testing out the different starting gifts you can choose as well. On this character, I picked the Bewitching branches, and wow, it's like Undead Rapport on steroids. You basically charm enemies to switch to your team. Once you've bewitched them, it seems to last forever, and even if you attack them, they don't react. It doesn't work on everything, but it's pretty funny making groups fight each other. With each of these classes, I scoured the countryside, defeating enemies along the way, getting enough runes to buy the torch from Calais, and then completing Groveside Cave. A lot of enemies and bosses are vulnerable to staggering, especially at the beginning, so the longsword and halberd are quite effective. Vagabond felt great. Typical sword and board combat, I think overall a strong class. And even when we look at efficiency and PvP optimization, thinking more long term, it's great because in that case it's actually the lowest stats which matter. You want the stats you won't be using to be as low as possible, because any stats you aren't benefiting from are essentially wasted, inflating your level. Vagabond, I think, has the most versatile stats. It is probably the best starting class overall. The Warrior is the only class that starts out dual wielding, and it has the highest dexterity of all at 16. It's fairly well rounded, but primarily an agile melee focused class, focused on dexterity instead of strength. Armor set is the Warrior legs and gauntlets, plus the blue cloth vest and cowl. The weapons are dual wielded scimitars with a backup wooden shield. The scimitars are very spammable and combo together well. I do feel like this might be a slightly more tricky class to play for beginners. There's slightly less options, and because spacing and timing is more important with less defense and shorter range. It felt that you needed to be more offensive from the beginning than a lot of the other classes, which some people might prefer. I've just really been enjoying the new block counter or guard counter mechanic, where you block an attack from an enemy and counter it to break their stance. And you can't really do that if you're dual wielding scimitars. The Hero is another top starting class for me, topping out the strength stat at 16, highest for any class, and has the lowest starting intelligence and mind of 7 and 9 respectively. It starts with a champion's armor set, large leather shield, and battle axe. With the Hero, I did try out the Stone Sword Key starting gift for this one, because you'll notice at the first sight of Grace, there's an imp statue for you to use it on and dispel the magic seal. I don't actually know whether this was a good idea or not though, because without going into too much detail, let's just say the labyrinth that this opens up doesn't feel like the most friendly. The weapon skill is called Wild Strikes. It starts a sustained flurry of attacks, which can be very impactful on enemies with less defense and poise, as you can see against the Beastman in the Groveside Caves. High strength and a battle axe that staggers often mean you can just brute force your way through everything a lot of the time if that playstyle suits you. Next up is the Bandit. Quite different from the previous classes so far, this one is the Thief of Elden Ring, the Rogue class with the highest arcane stat at 14. It's a good one to get you familiar with Elden Ring's improved stealth systems. You can crouch past enemies and creep up behind for backstabs. It starts with the Bandit armor set, the buckler shield, a great knife, and a short bow with 30 bone arrows. And remember, you can always craft more arrows when needed with Elden Ring's new crafting system. Now the main question you'll be asking with the Bandit is, does the starting knife cause bleed? And I'm happy to say it does indeed inflict blood loss once you build up your attacks, and this will be a key element in your strategy. Bows are very freeing in this game. You can fire while moving, while jumping, and the range is pretty good, even with a short bow. It's got a barrage skill which lets you pepper your enemies with arrows. The Bandit is probably the worst for mounted combat at the start anyway, and I only say that because the knife feels, well, it's so short, it just doesn't feel very effective. I will say though, the Great Knife has a spectacular weapon skill called Quick Step, and it's an enhanced dodge that lets you slip and weave around enemies, like skating on ice. Dancing around the Beastman in this manner was extremely satisfying, and so if you end up choosing this build, I highly recommend taking advantage of this movement. The Astrologer is the magic class. It's got the highest intelligence and mind stat at 16 and 15 respectively, and it also has the lowest vigor and strength of any class. The lowest vigor of 9 is worth pointing out because the Astrologer is fragile. It starts with the Astrologer's set, Scripture Wooden Shield, a short sword, and the Astrologer's staff. As you probably have already heard and seen, FromSoft has really let loose with magic and spells in Elden Ring. They look incredible. You don't even have to fully lock on when casting. As long as you're in the right direction, often your casts will find the target, which makes spellcasting feel so smooth. You can demolish most enemies from a distance with the Glintstone Pebble and Arc starting spells, but the tricky part then becomes managing your focus points. It's probably worth going all in on the Cerulean Tear Flasks for that reason if you're brave enough. Because the Astrologer had the highest mind stat, I thought it made good sense to choose the Fanged Imp Ashes. These are spirit summons that can help out, and they were surprisingly good. Interestingly, the short sword has a kick skill, good for breaking enemy stance. Worth noting that if you go bare hands in Elden Ring, you can perform the kick as well. Groveside Cave was no issue at all. It's a small enough beginner cave that you won't run out of focus points, so you can blast away to your heart's content. The Prophet is the main faith class with 16 starting faith, but it has the lowest endurance, intelligence, and dexterity, and very low starting health as well. It really is quite frail, wearing the Prophet set, a rickety shield, and short spear with a finger seal to cast incantations. To make up for the weak defense, you do have a heal incantation, which also heals allies, and Catch Flame, which is like combustion from Dark Souls 3. It's a very quick burst of flame from the hands, comes out fast, so it's easy to combo with your spear pokes. The short spear skill is called Pierce. It's an amazing option to strike from a distance and destroy the enemy's stance. The heavy attack is a double set of stabs, and overall this weapon is great for clearing out single targets in front of you. And if any get too close, within your spear range, you can just burn them away with Catch Flame. Spears of course feel great on horseback, useful for drive-bys because once again you can wreck stance with this thing. You have a high starting mind stat with this class as well, so plenty of opportunity to use your incantations. The Samurai comes in with some Eastern drip that has the highest starting endurance at 13 and really steps up with an extensive toolset right off the bat. You have the Land of Reed's armor set with Red Thorn round shield, and then a longbow and the Uchigitana. So you really have a lot of ways to approach combat. The Uchigitana also has bleed build-up, even more so than the Bandit's Great Knife. I will say, the fact that we have a class that starts with a katana is wild. It has an unsheathed skill, which slices through enemies and destroys their stance, and the longbow is extremely useful for long-range sniping. The Mighty Shot skill packs a huge punch, and once again it functions smoothly on horseback as well. I absolutely annihilated the Beastman with the Samurai setup, but then again I personally think katanas have always just been one of the most accessible weapon types. Look at that single light attack, 600 damage. The bleed is no joke, really shouldn't be underestimated. This is another great class. The Prisoner is a bit of a hybrid. It doesn't have the highest in any stat, but its strengths lie in a blend of dexterity and intelligence. It's almost a more defensive Astrologer. It's very unique in appearance, starting with the prisoner's clothing complete with an iron mask and rift shield, and wielding a glintstone staff and estoc. Magic Glint Blade is a very cool sorcery reminiscent of the floating chaos pyromancy from Dark Souls 3, in terms of function anyway. In this case, you conjure magical blades in the air to home in on the target. Because there's a delay, you could very easily time it to combo together with other attacks. But then again, it does have a tendency to fly quite straight and just miss the target if they strafe, so situational, I would say. The estoc is a thrusting weapon which can be used behind a shield while blocking. Now the starting rift shield is not great for this because it doesn't block all incoming damage, not 100% physical damage negation, but still it's obviously very easy to dispatch weak enemies behind the safety of your shield in this way. Also worth noting, you can perform a guard counter even while blocking with a weapon, which is pretty cool. I noticed in the Groveside Cave with the Pack of Wolves, you can also effectively select multiple enemies as you cast these spells, and they seem to remember which enemy you initially focused before the blade seeks its target. How cool is it that you can not only dodge through attacks now, but fully jump over them? Elden Ring does such a great job at making you feel like a badass sometimes. The Confessor has no highest or lowest stats. It does start at the highest total level of 10 however, and prioritizes faith at 14 with equal strength and dexterity. You might think of it as the Church Assassin. It starts with the full Confessor's armor set and Blue Crest Heater Shield, blocks 100% physical damage, which makes blocking much safer, much more useful, and it's wielding the Finger Seal to cast incantations and the Broadsword. The Broadsword skill is called Square Off. Depending on whether you use the light or heavy attack, you do some charged swipe or lunge. You have an Assassin's Approach incantation as well, which not only reduces full damage, but completely silences your footsteps. A very sinister ability that works well for stealth attacks. Urgent Heal doesn't heal all that much, but it can be cast while in motion, which makes it less risky to use in combat. The Beastman was fully blockable with his shield. Obviously he can still batter down your stamina and break your stance. Many attacks, especially the jumping attack, could break his stance however, even allowing a riposte opportunity. There's been an increasingly vocal group which have been campaigning pre-launch for the community to embrace the way of the Wretch, particularly when it comes to your first playthrough. So the Wretch is a recurring archetype that's appeared in all the Souls games. It's a blank slate class in many ways that starts with nothing but a simple club. I say simple, the club is actually a great weapon to be honest, but regardless, with not even a shield and an equal spread of stats set to 10 across the board, why would you choose this wretched class? Well, as some have pointed out recently, the starting classes in Elden Ring are almost excessive. They've got too much drip and begin with quite developed and established outlines. The Wretch purists would argue that when you start with nothing, you appreciate every new weapon, every new armor piece, that much more, and you are more likely to experiment with everything you find. I would argue that it's just quite funny to run around the lands between in the nude. The club skill is called Barbaric Roar. With this buff, strong attacks swap to savage combo chains. Obviously with no shield and no armor, you can't play very defensively, but your club does do a lot of the work for you. It does a lot of poise damage, so oftentimes you'll be able to interrupt enemy attacks. Mounted combat with a club is okay, not too great though. Normally I think longer range weapons are best on horseback. Okay, if we take a look at the base stats for the classes, add them all up for each and subtract each starting level, you get 79. Each individual attribute has a max level cap of 99, and there's 8 attributes. 792 minus the 79 starting stats is 713, which should mean each class has the same max level of 713. And that's not where most PvP fights will take place. When we talk about level metas with regards to PvP, that's referring to the level cap where the multiplayer mostly takes place. This is firstly to ensure a healthy matchmaking future for the game as time goes on, and also to ensure that you have optimized builds that specialize in certain areas without having access to absolutely everything. It sounds odd at first, but in this case, restrictions increase variety. To some extent, this level is always decided by the community, and by all means we should figure out what would be best. It's a little early to be predicting soul level metas in the first week, but judging by the stat similarities to previous games, I think it will be 120. And once you get in a position to start making PvP builds where min-maxing optimization becomes important and you don't want wasted levels, the best starting class is typically going to be the Vagabond. However, if you're about to embark on your first playthrough, then efficiency is irrelevant, it doesn't matter at all, and you should maybe pick the Wretch. I've never chosen the Naked class for a first playthrough before in any Souls game, but after listening to all the arguments for it, I think I might be a convert. It seems like it might be the most personal and customizable when you start with nothing. Ultimately though, please pick whatever you think looks coolest and be reassured there is no bad choice.